Welcome back to another episode of SuckcessFull, the podcast.
I'm one of your hosts, Blake, and joining me,
I'm one of your other hosts, Justin.
And this is the podcast all about the not-so-subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in pursuit of it. Let's not waste any more time and get right to the show. I'm not even sure what number we're on, but I think we're on like 7 now, so high five to us.
High five. Yeah, this is exciting because we have almost reached 10 episodes already. Can you believe that?
I can believe it, but do I believe it? No. And I will tell you, actually, right before we got on here, Seth, we got a new TV yesterday and he was on Amazon. And when he was upstairs looking at it, our podcast popped up. And he's like, "Hey, Dad, you're on TV."
That's awesome.
I thought that was pretty badass. So he went, it was YouTube. He was on YouTube and was like, "Hey, you guys are first in search." I'm like, oh, he said, "You're with that girl." I'm like, "That's not just a girl. Her name is Blake." He's like, yeah. You know, whatever. All right. So anyway.
Moving on. I already said you're on TV. That's good enough.
Just stop inflating your ego. Just stop, Dad. So I think that brings us up to today's topic. And it's going to be a really fun one and a lot of good stories. And more importantly, some really cool lessons here. So I'm going to kick it off with the idea that not only getting out of your head, but really as you start thinking about success and you start thinking about what you think perfect is, what I found over time is that vision changes with you. And part of being stuck in that moment in realizing today what you want tomorrow. And then when you get what you want tomorrow, it doesn't necessarily equate to what you thought it would. And it's very funny to me because success is very different to everyone, but also the idea that if it's not perfect or it's not up to speed to what you think it is, we get so caught up in here that we forget that impact can have an impact on someone else. A great example of that was, God, this is going to date me here, but almost like 2 decades ago when I was doing stand-up comedy and I got on stage. My mom was actually in the audience. She came out to one of the shows and I was like totally nervous. And I'm usually not very nervous, but I was really nervous. And I had this whole thing planned out because most of my act back then was risque, I guess is the right word, not mom appropriate. And so I tried to clean it up. I did my act, but it didn't feel genuine to me. And I came off stage. I felt like I bombed. The jokes didn't hit where I wanted them to. I was just really crestfallen and it just sucked butt. I mean, I was devastated. Like, I don't think I even talked to anyone for like 2 days. So anyways, this is way before social media was big. And so I'm walking, I think I was with Eric or someone else, and we had lunch one day. And this kid, and I say kid, he's probably 18, comes up to me and is like, "Dude, I loved your set the other night." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, yeah, that I come to all your shows. I don't know who this guy is. He never introduced himself. He just came literally off the street and we're eating at Barney's Beanery in West Hollywood. And he's just like, "Dude, you crushed it. I love the new stuff you did. Keep that up." And just like left. And we're sitting there at the table and Eric, he just looks at me and goes, "What the hell was that?" And I'm just like, it's stunned, baffled. And I'd been beating myself up for 2 days, maybe 3 at this point in time, just devastated. And all of a sudden I got this total re-energization and just felt like $1,000,000 off of one comment. And so the reason I want to start here is the fact that what we think inside and what we feel inside isn't necessarily reflective of what is really going on out there. And I think a lot of the times when we go through these episodes or pieces or whatever we want to call them, the best thing to do is be present and to not be expecting a lot of things and just go through the motions and know that you did a great job, know that you put your heart into it and whatever. And whether it's an unbelievable experience or it's a crappy one, you're going to get through it and it's not permanent. It's not permanent one way or the other. And so being married to an expectation is really devastating if you don't get that self-validation from external. And so when you go through it from an internal place and you say, "Look, I did what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to go crush this," and go out of it, you get a much better result. And I've practiced that now for probably 15 years. I didn't adopt it right away because I wasn't mature enough yet. Hopefully you all are. I was not. It's changed my world ever since. So I apologize for the long diatribe this morning, but tag, you're it, Blake.
Well, that's an interesting story. And that kind of reminds me of, I was on this virtual class thing. This was like a couple months ago. And there was an independent filmmaker on there who was talking about how he essentially does, like, all of his movies that he's ever directed have been independent, but he's garnered all of the money and financing himself. But he only does projects that are like over $1 million. And since he started out pretty much, he only ever did like feature films starting out at like $1 million budget. And everybody was like, "Well, how the hell did you do that?" He said that a lot of people, when they are in the process of doing a project, they get caught up in the little pieces of it. and they get caught up in this has to be perfect, that has to be perfect. I have to have the perfect selling points. I've got to have an elevator pitch. I've got to have all these things. He said, what's funny is people forget sometimes their audience and the fact that if you're going into a meeting to get financing, that person is not a screenwriter. That person is not a film director. All they care about is the money side of things. He said, people go in and they pitch their script and they tell them every little detail of what's going on in the script. But that doesn't work because they don't care. People spend all this time on perfecting that aspect of it to think that that's how it's going to sell because they're so excited about the story because most filmmakers are storytellers. But finance people are not. So they only care about it being entertaining and making money for them at the end of the day. They don't really care. He goes, half the time, I tell them a log line, like it's about this, A equals B equals C, and that's it. It's like one sentence. I don't go into detail about the characters. I don't go into detail about any of that. I get right into the business part. And I thought that was interesting because I think that hangs up a lot of people, especially creatives, because we get so caught up in like the things we're excited about, say like the story part or whatever, that we're like, okay, this has to be perfect and that has to be perfect. And I've got to do these things first. And then you go into a meeting like that and none of that was even relevant. And we get so up in our head about it.
It's an awesome example, and it's fun to learn from someone that thinks differently, that has been through that experience. And it's not just about creatives. I think most people do that. Like in terms of you go into this thing expecting one thing and this is what they want. My favorite thing is when I go into companies, they're like, this is what our consumers want. I'm like, well, how do you know? We did a survey. Well, who gives a shit about a survey? Have you talked to your customers? Have you actually interacted with them? Have you whatever with them? The idea is actually speaking with them, not just doing surveys and stuff like that. And the same thing with this. It sounds like this guy was very intelligent. He sat down and said, look, I need to get this funding. What's the best way for me to do this? And understanding that the business community is 100% right. They don't care about what the script is. They want to know, okay, if I put in $1 million, can I make $2 million off of it? Can I make 10 million? Is it going to be the next Blair Witch? What is this thing going to be for me? I think that's a really important lesson here. One of the examples that I have of almost that exactly was years and years ago when I was pitching to do this thing called robotic process automation. There was basically 5 of us. They were trying to figure out for the company the next strategic vision of what we're going to do from an IT perspective. Okay, internet technology. What are we going to do here? Or what are we going to do to invest these millions of dollars? I was up against a bunch of IT people, and I'm not in IT. I was in process improvement and all that kind of stuff. So I was senior director of process improvement and walked in there, and everyone else went in there with this vision of this is where IT is going. This is where the world of IT is going. Our pitch was completely 100% different to that. It was, look, this is a better customer experience. It saves on time and energy so people can actually be more creative and we can find more solutions to tomorrow's problems. And it was the funniest thing because very weird when I go into pitches like that. I either go first or I go last. I never go middle. And the reason for that is I want to set the bar for someone because I want to see what other people are doing. That's why I love going last, or I love to start and just set the tone for everything. We were the last that day, and it was so funny because I think our pitch was 30 minutes and there were 5 of us, and they only took 10-minute breaks in between. So it's like 3-4 hours of hearing everyone speak on this stuff. And we ended up getting it. And not only did we get it, we got a 3-year contract to do it. And I got a whole new team and everything to do it. And they're still doing it today. Part of doing these things is not thinking like everyone else, is not expecting, like looking out, like putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So like if you're going for this stuff, if you want something, try not to do what everyone else is doing. Try not to follow that path. I know you're going to tell a story in a second here, which I think is going to be pretty emblematic of this, of getting so caught up in one little detail, but realize that life is a story. And if you've got a character that's an auxiliary, kind of in the background here, kind of an extra floating around out there, no one gives a shit about the extras. Okay. I hate to tell you this. If you're a lifetime extra, I'm sorry. Like that's just, that no one cares. They look out for the big players. And so realize that one of the things I talk about with clients is life's a story, and you've got to realize that there's all going to be all these things in the background, the peripheral. But if you're focused on what your story should be, you'll find the right characters. You'll find all these different things, and it will not consume you to worry about the little details, but look out for the bigger ones.
I love the way that you tied that into storytelling, because I think that's important, and it gets into the idea of the perception that we have of perfection, how that ties into our mindset when it comes to success or when it comes to these different areas of our life, and kind of these ideas that we have about how things should look or how things should feel or, whatever. And I think that's part of the problem is we often let these perceptions and these assumptions rule our decision making, when half the time, if we really sit down and think about it and we get out of our head and we stop being so, I guess, nervous and concerned about not getting the reaction we're looking for or whatever, oftentimes we come to find that that just gets in the way. The perception of it isn't even correct. It's just an assumption. And it's funny because, to get into my story here, I shot a short film with Rob like several years ago, and it was a very tiny project. We had, I think, 5 people in total on the project. We had no money. It was one of those things where my friend's sister, who was from the London School of Theatre, flew in, and I had always wanted to work with her, and she just loved the script I had. And so we literally set everything up within like, I don't know, I think a week maybe. And that was including like the writing and development and everything. We were so low budget and so fast with everything. She literally flew in from Sweden and had to go back to Sweden. She literally, the day we shot, we were racing for time because we shot everything in one day and she was literally leaving. So we finished shooting at like, I think 2 or 3 in the morning, and she had a flight at like 7. So it was kind of a rough thing. She flew in, and it was just like a passion project kind of thing. And I'm so grateful to her for doing that, because she's an amazing actress, and to everyone who was on that. But what's funny about it is we did that so low budget that we actually shot the entire sound on an iPad, and the rest of the sound design was literally built from scratch. The whole thing is shot on a beach, and it's like this kind of ethereal, she keeps repeating this strange dream that she's having. Because it was shot on the beach, there was no way for us to get sound on there. So we literally had to rebuild it. And when everything was said and done, we went through this whole process. We kept editing the sound. And at the end of the day, because we're all filmmakers, we were like, this isn't good enough. It's just not good enough. So it sat for years. I think like 2 or 3 years it sat on a hard drive. We never released it. We didn't do anything with it. She asked about it. The other actor asked about it. And I said, well, we can have you redo the sound. I don't really know. I think the sound isn't good enough to release. Years pass, and I was going through the hard drives because I was trying to get all of my portfolio in one place, because I was really bad about that when I lived in LA. I didn't have time. It was all over 50 billion hard drives. Nothing was organized. Back then, we didn't have a system for organizing any of that. So I was redoing all of that, re-editing and like getting stuff together. And I came across it, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to watch it for nostalgia's sake, right? And I was like, this is actually good. And I was like, okay, hold on a second. So I sent it to Rob, and I'm like, am I remembering correctly? I thought this was not usable. And he's like, well, it's not perfect, but it is actually pretty good. I don't know. So I sent it to a couple of my friends in the industry and said, hey, I need you to tell me what you think about the sound. And I literally said nothing else. I didn't lead the witness. I didn't tell them anything. I just said, I need you to tell me what you think about the sound. That's it. Little did I know, one of the friends that I sent it to him because he was a writer in the industry and he's an actor. Had no idea he was a professional sound designer. He sent me message upon message. Oh my God, how did you do this? This is so great, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what the fuck? And he goes, why are you asking about the sound? He said, the sound is fantastic. I mean, the design's amazing. And I'm just like, really? I said, I sent it to you because we thought it sucked. And he was like, okay, you need to get out of your head. And so long story short, after everybody came back and was like, I don't know what you're talking about, why you're asking me about the sound is great. We submitted it to festival. We went to festival and we won multiple awards for that project. And it's just so funny though, because it took years for that to happen because we never released it. I kick myself now because it's not the first time I've done that to myself, but that's the biggest one I've ever done to myself, where it's been like, usually it's like I didn't release it, months ago, not years. So now we have a different perspective on that. And part of it was that we didn't have the equipment that everyone's like industry standard, the, fancy, whatever equipment. We weren't, Rob's great at sound design and he now is a lot more confident with it. But back then he had just started in that. So he wasn't super confident with it. I didn't know. So, because I wasn't really a sound designer or a sound editor back then. So I didn't know what was good or what wasn't. All I knew is that, I don't know, maybe I'm being told by these people it's not good. So maybe it's not. Yeah. So it ended up, that's what happened. And it's funny. And of course, now everybody at the festival is like, you shot that on an iPad? Like all the sound. And then we're telling the story. And now it's funny because we literally had on the floor, surrounded by pillows, talking into the thing because we didn't have a sound mic. I mean, we had one, but not for that type of stuff. Back then, I didn't have a podcasting mic. I didn't have all these things. So it's just funny now because everyone's like, you did that on an iPad? But like, we were like, oh no, we did it on an iPad. Like, we can't tell anybody. Don't tell anyone we did it on an iPad back then, you know? And now everyone's just like, it's a funny story.
But that to me is what makes these things so awesome, those pieces of it, because that story is so fun. You telling it now makes you laugh. But at the time, I'm sure it was not a laughing moment. You're like, oh, God dang it. Why didn't we do this then? Whatever. But I think that's part of like the life's journey, right? That you learn from those things, and whether you repeat them or not is not necessarily the point. The point is that you realize it's kind of those reference points to say, look, what goes on up here is usually fucked up. I'm just going to say it. It's usually, very rarely, I think
often misleading.
It's totally misleading, but you also, you're so much more critical of yourself. We all hear that, but your story is a great example. A few of the things I've talked about is a great example in terms of what you thought up here didn't translate out, and not necessarily to everybody, because we assume whatever we're thinking, someone else is thinking. That's like a huge fallacy of humans. And especially when it comes to perfectionism or wanting to do something, our perception and our belief is a projection, not a reality. And it's so funny because I think of it like a movie theater. We're sitting in the theater and the movie playing out before us is open to interpretation, but we're not in the audience. We're projecting this thing and we're hoping we get feedback. We hope we get whatever back from it. But rather than looking at it like, look, I put it out there. What happens, happens. Let's move on. Let's go to the next thing. I think that's whether you look back 2 years and do it and it goes through and you get awards, or you find something like, hey, I can use this piece of this over here, or it's just a reference point to say, man, look how far I've come. Because it's also fun to look back at those moments and go, yeah, we used an iPad for this. We use an iPad.
And like a really shitty one, not even a new one, the really shitty old ones from like, I don't know, generation 1 or 2 old. Yeah.
But think of the arrogance that takes too. Think of that, like we're going to shoot a movie. You didn't have anything else also, but it's also relatively ignorant to think we can shoot a movie on an iPad. You know what I'm saying? Like the audacity of most people in the industry would say, like you did, like, oh, gee, this is embarrassing. I can't even work with you. And yet it won all these awards and everything. And the idea here is you've got to get out of here. And you've also got to realize that some of these things are going to blossom into beautiful things and some aren't. But the point of it all together is it doesn't matter. You got to move on. You've got to keep pursuing what's next. And the idea to experiment, the idea to try something new is awesome. And I love the idea that you had the audacity, because even I wouldn't have the balls to do that, to say, look, we got to do this. I'm going to shoot.
Well, to be clear, the sound was shot, the voiceover and all that was shot on the iPad. The actual visuals were shot on a professional camera. But even still, an iPad is, especially back then, and nowadays that's a little different. But back then, yeah, that was nowhere close to being industry standard. And the thing is I will say though, I think part of that gets into the perception of perfection, especially in the industry. Everyone's so caught up on having those fancy equipment. Oh, we got to shoot this on a red, or we got to shoot this on a whatever, we have to have this lens. We have to have that fancy light. If you don't use those tools to your advantage, it doesn't matter how great your camera is or whatever, it's still going to suck. And so I've always had that opinion because I have been independent for so long in terms of that side of the industry. Started independent, including on the acting side. And I've been in all sides of it. And with that being said, it's really being able to take all the different pieces of that and learn the fact that sometimes these perceptions say of like, oh, we have to have this perfect equipment. No, I've actually shot really great stuff on less. And I've had people who come in and shoot on these reds and whatever, and they don't know how to actually even use them. And then they go to festival and everyone's like, this doesn't look like it was shot on a red because reds have to have a bajillion lights. Did you know that? I wouldn't say it's just the entertainment industry. All industries have this sort of industry standard, blah, blah, blah. I think it's more about being confident enough in your own skills and ability to use the tools that you have at your disposal in the most impactful way you can use them. And if you're able to do that and be confident enough in what you're doing half the time, you can do a lot with a little. I mean, the biggest project I've ever done had literally no budget, and it had so many people attached to it, I didn't even know half the people on the credits list.
And I think those are important lessons. That's the kind of thing that having those reference points, especially early in your career, helps shape where you go in the future, because you can look back and say, look, we don't need to spend $10 million on this. We can do it for 5, and this is why. Or we can do whatever for this. Back when I was starting out in entertainment, it was so funny. We've talked about it. I went out for all these interviews and stuff. One of the things I didn't tell you was, so for my last interview before I got hired, was the fact that I started thinking like, okay, because my first few times I was just arrogant to go out there. I'm like, look, I got called in for an interview. Of course they want me. No, they didn't give a crap about me, right? They need to fill a position. So I started modifying my approach each time. And so I gave myself, I think it was 6 months, something like that, to get in and do all this stuff. But the point of where I'm going with this is that the final time I went in there, I said, look, I charted out everything that I'd done wrong or didn't think I was great at, or things that made me feel insecure, some of the feedback I got. And then I thought about things that I'm really good at. And one of the things I knew I was good at is self-promotion, just being me. So I need to stand out. That was my big thing. I need to stand out. I need to be memorable, and I need to make them laugh. I walked into my final interview, and this is after like 300 rejections. So this isn't like fresh out of the gate. This is the lowest of low. I went in there really high, and I talked about my experience so far, and I actually used some of my past experience. They're asking, why should we even hire you? And I said, look, I've been on X amount of interviews, and I've bombed a lot of them, but I'm not going to bomb this one. And this is why. And I think the arrogance that I showed there, but also the confidence with it, that I could back it up, and that I'd been there before, sold that to them. I said, look, I'm not going to make any commitments for you. You should sign me up today. Give me 1 month. Give me 1 month. I don't want a contract. Just pay me weekly. And after a month, if you think I'm worth it, great. If not, I'll walk away. And they said, no one does that. I got the job. The point there is that it took me a long time to get to that position. I had to do a lot of self-reflection, and I had to decide to myself, what did success in this look like? And the success here looked like I needed to get this job. I wanted this. I really, really wanted this. It was just something that I needed. I know I could rock at it. Give me that chance. And so rather than say, woe is me, why won't anyone give me a chance? I kept refining myself to get to the point where they couldn't say no.
I think that gets into a little bit of a different topic, which I want to do an entire episode on, which I'll touch on here. But the fact that what you're talking about with the self-promotion and like, oh, it was arrogant or whatever, people have this sort of perception of success, and they think that somehow you get there by not self-promoting. And we have this idea of self-promotion as if it is arrogant or, oh, that guy's an asshole or, whatever. But it's not arrogance if there's fact behind it. It's not arrogant. I mean, you can say things and be confident and be assertive without being an asshole. And I think we often forget that, especially when we're trying to do our own stuff, because we're afraid of the perception that other people are going to have of us, or that we're not going to come across as perfect. And that's something too, is to get into the perfection side of it, is that I think people kind of have this idea that in order to be successful, you have to be perfect. You have to have this perfectly curated Instagram. You have to have a perfectly curated style. Your suits have to be perfectly tailored. We have these sort of ideas of what success is, and it's often presented to us as if it's perfect. But especially you and I definitely know, coming from the entertainment industry, it's not.
Oh,
it's not at all. That is all just marketing. It's marketing.
And I think that's part of the piece of it, though. I agree. I think this needs to be a separate full episode to talk about. But I think the idea of success, and when we start thinking about perfectionism and we start thinking about that future state, we leave out the marketing piece of that. That is the piece that's needed. One of my favorite conversations I've had of recent with a buddy of mine was the fact that, so he was talking to this client, and they're like, look, we need to make more sales. He goes, great. What do you want to spend on marketing? We don't. He's like, on flag on the field here. Okay, hang on. So you want to be an industry leader, but he's like, oh, marketing is just fluff. It doesn't work. And I'm like, and he spent hours of his time at a bill rate of X to just try to convince them they even needed marketing. And it's an afterthought a lot of the time. But when you think about yourself in particular, and you think about that future state or that current state that you want, when you think about perfectionism that you want, also the piece of that is, how are you presenting yourself? How are you marketing yourself to get there? When you start thinking about, you went back to the drawing board, remarketed your stuff, and you sliced it, and you edited it, you did all these things to get it to where it was. But the end state of that is, okay, we've won a bunch of awards, but you didn't just do that. You marketed the crap out of it. You did all these things to publish. You pushed it out there. You kept sharing with it. And part of, I think, and I agree with you, it's not arrogance, but it is funny because I feel like one of my biggest critiques I ever got from someone was that my confidence can be misconstrued as arrogance. And I took that as a compliment. And I came home and told Kelly, and she was like, he's right. And I'm like, what? And she's like, well, confidence can be intimidating. And I was like, why should I apologize for confidence? Why should I change who I am because of someone else's insecurities? And again, we'll talk about this on a different episode, but I think
Yes.
as we go forward here and we start talking about getting out of here and realizing that we're successful in so many other aspects of our lives, it's important to realize that when you project something and you expect that projection to come back at you like a mirror, like we're doing here on the screen, you're never going to get the same reflection back. And so if you're expecting output to come in that's mirroring what you want all times, you're going to come up short 99% of it. All I have to say is if you want the truest moment of your life to come to a head and you want humility beyond belief, take the stage for 5 minutes at a comedy club. Anyone out there?
Yeah, comedy's tough. That is one thing I never did because it terrifies me. I'm not going to lie. I don't know how you guys do that.
But I see, to me, I think that is the most, you would get rid of so many assholes in this world, so many douchebags. It was a requirement in the US that you spend 10 minutes on stage with 300 random people in the crowd, and you have to make them laugh. You cannot get off stage until you make them laugh. All right, and I know there's a bunch of introverts out there going, that is horrible. I could never do that. That's the point. You got to get way out of your comfort zone. You've got to experience rejection. That is, you can't look around and go, oh, well, that guy did it. It's you. There's no one you can point the finger at. If you bomb, it is on you. I tell you this because I want people to experience that and understand that when you think of success, when you think about perfectionism, there is no such thing. And the greatest way to understand that is to do something where you are by yourself projecting something and you want that validation, because no one goes on stage going, look, I hope they hate me. Because it's so devastating. You want them to like you back. And it's great for marketing. It's great for self-esteem. It's great for all these things because you realize that what you think up here, you may think you're the best joke ever and you practice it and you did it in, let's say, Omaha. And then you go to do it in New York City and it bombs. You're going, what happened? That's life. It is a great example of understanding that your audience is going to change every single time. And the expectation is if you're looking for outside validation on your success, on your perfection, because you're projecting that out there, you're going to come up short 99% of the time. So stop doing it.
People who know me really well know I say two things a lot. The first one is you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Okay.
And the second one is in order to grow, you have to go where you've never been before and you have to do things you've never done before. And that means stepping out of your comfort zone. And I say those two things a lot because I think ultimately perfectionism is a lack of having that confidence. It's often needing the validation. It's the insecurity. It's fear, ultimately. Whereas when you are able to say, okay, this is good enough, moving on, that's when you take your power back, essentially. You have more confidence. You're able to be not only confident, but aware of where your time and energy is going, because your time and energy is ultimately the universal language and the universal currency of everything. So if you can master the transaction of your time and your energy, and you do that by debunking these myths about your perception when it comes to perfection, and you realize that good enough is more perfect than perfectionism, you will start opening up your mind to all these different opportunities. And for those of you who are really struggling with this, I highly recommend you read the book by Shonda Rhimes called A Year of Yes. The Year of Yes is all about her. Literally, she did it for a year. All the things that made her uncomfortable, she said yes to, and it totally transformed her entire career. Oftentimes, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And part of that is, I think, when you're really struggling with perfectionism, is taking time to learn the different things that you're insecure about, because it'll give you that confidence and that kind of wherewithal to know, okay, I should keep putting my energy in this or I shouldn't, or this has enough of my energy, it's time to move on to something else. Because you can be the next Shonda Rhimes or the next Martin Scorsese or whoever, your big idol is. But if you are so stuck on the project that was supposed to be the stepping stone to that you never even get to the big project, it doesn't matter how great you are. You're not going to succeed because you never got to it in the first place.
100%. And absolutely right. I've actually never read that book. I'd love to. I love Shonda Rhimes.
You need to read it. It's really good.
All right. The Year of Yes. It's in my queue. I'll get it after this. But Blake, I think you left off one thing that you always tell people too is don't fart in an elevator.
I would say that's probably a really good good suggestion.
So, so along those lines, since we're talking about perfectionism and just the belief of it. So one time we were coming out of a pitch meeting I had a dog, the stuffed dog. I can't remember it. Scott, if you're listening to this, please type in the comments below what its name was, but it was like Rufus the dog or something like that. It was a stuffed dog that had a remote control on it, and it had the most realistic sounding fart sounds. It had 4 different ones on it. Okay. So I had just gotten it and I was carrying it under my arms. I thought it'd be cute to bring to the pitch meeting as like, and why'd you bring a stuffed animal? Well, let me show you and get people laughing. So we're in this elevator and a bunch of people get on, and it's like New York, where this is in LA, but it's still, you're like this, right? So I pass the dog to Scott and I start pushing the buttons, and they're so loud. It's like juicy and they're all these different ones. And finally someone turns around and goes, "That is disgusting. Who's ever doing that? Would you please stop?" And everyone's just like, no one says a word. And the next, I don't know what floor it was. We were in the very high, let's say 17. By the time we got to 6, people just ran out of the elevator. And I am crying, laughing so hard. And this woman is standing next to me. I don't know who she is at this stage of the game, looks over at me and goes, "That was amazing." And I'm like, "What was?" She goes, "My son has the exact same toy. So I knew what you had." And because she kept looking around, she saw, "Is that your buddy over there?" I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Here's my card." I can't remember her name. I want to say it was like coming from. She goes, "I will work with you anytime."
That's awesome. That's a cool story.
It was unbelievable, but it's just one of those times that no one would expect that to turn out that way. And I just did it because I thought it was going to be funny. I did no other intention in mind. And of course, Scott was just devastated. He's just sitting in the back like, "Oh God, please don't. They're going to hate us. They're going to kick us out of the building." And so I walked out of there and I was like, see, sometimes you can just be yourself. Sometimes you don't have to worry about being perfect or standing perfectly upright in the elevator. And I wish, please, if you were listening to this, that dude that yelled out, "That is disgusting," please stop. Please. It was just a joke. I'm sure he went home that night and was like, "Well,
It sounds like they all did, that they thought it was real.
Except for, I think her name was, anyways, they kept, because, like the first time everyone just like, okay, I didn't hear anything. By the third, they're like, kind of like, you can kind of see the like, who's that? We're sitting all the way in the back, standing all the way in the back. It was probably, oh God, Kelly was so mad at me when I got home. She's like, why would you ever jeopardize anything like that? I'm like, I'm not jeopardizing anything. No one knew who I was in there, and it made someone's day. That was worth it.
Well, it's funny because that's actually something that a lot of people wouldn't have done because it would have embarrassed them. That comes natural for you because you're a comedian. But I think it's funny that it's just also a good example of the fact that for most people, that would be stepping out of their comfort zone in some way. And then you end up getting this huge contact from it. And it was just through you being authentic. I think that's an awesome story.
And it's fun. And I think that that's part of what we always talk about on this podcast too. And you and I talk about this offline all the time is don't forget to have fun. And I think a lot of the times, like right before the show, we were just talking about a few examples of Blake had brought up for men, you have to wear the perfect watch on Instagram. You have to do, or TikTok, whatever, you have all these set criteria of things. I just think it's so funny that there is no, if I can leave everyone out there with one truism from me to you all is there's no prescription for success and there's no prescription for perception. Just be your authentic self at all times, treat people well, do the right things, and most importantly, have fun.
I agree with that. I think having fun is really important. I think we forget that part a lot, and we kind of get caught up in the process of it, that we forget the journey is supposed to be a journey. It's supposed to be enjoyable. Even if you achieve every single thing that you want to achieve, you're not going to just inherently be happy once you achieve that, because you would have had to go through the process of that too. The time that you're spending during getting from point A to point B is just as important as the time you spend when you get to B and are you already there. And I think sometimes another idea that we have of perfectionism is that in order to be successful, we have to make these huge leaps and bounds all the time. And it's often not that, though. It's often the smaller things that we do day to day. And for example, when I got back into writing, I was like, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to get back into writing like I used to. And for those of you who don't know, the way I used to write was I wrote every day for hours a day. I was so tied into it. Then I stepped away from writing for many years and was focusing on other things. So when I came back to it, even though I'm just as good as I was before in terms of my skill level hasn't changed, it's a mindset you have to get into of writing every day like that. So in the very beginning, I was like, I'm going to spend at least an hour every single day. Well, that didn't happen.
Never
Didn't
done.
happen at all. And then what would happen is I'd be like, okay, I'm going to designate Sunday. I'm going to write on Sundays. And then that didn't happen either because I had this idea that it had to be such a long period of time. So for example, if I was like, oh, I need to write for an hour, but I only had 30 minutes, I was like, oh, well, it's not an hour. So I wouldn't write. It took me about a week to realize, well, that's stupid. I should just try to write even 10 minutes a day to start, then build up to that. Because when you try to make these huge leaps and bounds and these huge changes, first off, it takes a second to get your scheduling right if you're like me doing 50 billion things all the time.
Yep.
And second off, it takes about, isn't it 60 days, I think, before a habit actually becomes like a habit. So it takes like 2 months of consistency before that's going to become just like a normal everyday thing for you.
Absolutely. And I think that that's part of what people forget too, is that part of what, I'm going to use your example of writing for a second here, because I love writing. And I think that it's also important to journal because it gives you those reference points. And I think that part of perfectionism is that you can look back at your own writing and realize, I said, what? Like I felt what when? And you're like, I don't remember that. And you realize that there is no such thing as perfection. One of my biggest pet peeves, I have just a few out there. And one of my biggest is that people, whenever they say I'm a perfectionist, I'm always like, well, you're an idiot. I don't say that lightly. I say that, or I don't just say it flippantly. I mean that because one, there's no such thing as perfection. And two, it's just an excuse to be anal for no reason.
Or not self-aware.
Absolutely. Yes. You're incredibly not self-reflective and you're not respectful usually of other people because it's just, hey, look, it's just the way I do things. It's just who I am. Well, that's not the best approach either. I think that as we go forward here and you think about and you get in those silent mode, because we all get there sometimes. We're like, I'm so got my blinders on. I've got to do this one thing because this is what I need to do. Realize that it's a stepping stone usually. If you go in, we'll just go back to what most people do at the beginning of the year. You set yearly goals. If I remember right, at the gym, if anyone is a gym owner, please let me know. But I believe the 18th of January or the 17th of January, there's actually, if you own gyms, that is when most people start canceling their membership. It's January 6th, 18th or 17th. It's that soon. And the point of it is that they can't even make it 17 days, 18 days, because they go all in. I'm going to work out for 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm going to pee blood, but I'm going to have the biggest muscles on earth. And you're like, what? You can't do that. It's the little things that get you there. And so if you want to achieve more, if you want to take your life to the next level, it's not about taking the leaps. It's about taking it stage by stage by stage. And then once you'll start realizing that's when you leapfrog. That's when you start getting those big moments. It's not you start and there's big moments. It's you've got to take and you've got to do the work at whatever stage, whether you're an artist, whether you're an executive, whether you are just starting out your career, whether you're in college, it's taking those steps. I mean, for those that have ever applied to college or any job, you didn't just walk in one day and say, I'm going to get that job or I'm going to go to that school. You had to apply. You had to be accepted. You have to go through an interview process. It's steps. There's steps to all these things. Some are bigger than others, but you've got to be able to be self-reflective to the point where you can say, look, this is part of the journey. This isn't the end of the journey. This is the part of it. How am I going to interpret it? What am I going to do here? And how can I expand my horizons?
Well, I think that gets into the idea of instant gratification. I think sometimes perfectionism comes from the need for the instant gratification. But oftentimes, that's not really what happens. I mean, even if you get that instant gratification, it's not sustainable. You have to work up to each tier. It's almost like a video game. You build up your skill, you beat the boss, then you go to the next level. You build up your skill, you beat the boss. It's kind of the same thing as you go along. You have to go along the tiers, like you're saying. And I think that need for the instant gratification of things gets in the way a lot of times because that gratification is tied to our motivation. It's tied to our confidence. It's tied to all these things that we give it that amount of control over our lives and our decision making. And it took me a long time to really work on some of that stuff, even myself, because over the years, I've had to do affirmations like, my fears are not my reality. My anxieties are not a real reflection of what's going on. Because you get kind of all up in your head about this stuff. And half the time, the people even around you are like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not what's going on at all. Oh.
Wait, what? But I think you said something very important there. And I think it's true to everyone. Everything can be explained by a video game. It's just that simple. It can. Like, I told my son this the other day. He's like, that doesn't make any sense, Dad. But it's totally true. You win, you lose. You get a dopamine hit. You get all these things, except for, multiple lives, unless you're, Hindu or Buddhist and you believe in the samsaric cycle and stuff. Most people, you don't come back. And so the idea is you've got to take it one step at a time. You get a bigger hit, and then you just get so obsessed with it and you get into it. And so I think at some point, if the book isn't out there, I may have to write this. It's that everything in life comes down to a video game.
Life is a Video Game by Justin Prust. Well, I would argue that if you really want to get into it, so if you think back on your life, how many lives have you technically lived? If you think back on even say who you were in high school versus now, can you say that's anywhere close to an accurate depiction of who you are now? Probably not. So if anything, and that kind of gets into the last thing I was going to say was your idea of what's good enough is going to evolve with time. And your idea of your perfectionism and all that, it's all going to evolve because a lot of people think when they first start something, they get more caught up in that perfectionism because they're worried about the instant gratification, the validation, the confidence, all these things. But to use the example I've used before of when I get clients who are like, oh, I need to have a social media presence. And I say, okay, you need to be on camera. What? Yeah, you need to be on camera. I'll coach you, but in the very beginning, they're like, ugh. And then after even, I would say 4 times of doing it, they get a lot more comfortable. And then they get less, oh, this has to be perfect. And that's why I say sometimes you got to work on your confidence and you got to work on your knowledge of whatever that thing is. You're not going to always be perfect at something right out the gate. If you were, life would be awful boring, wouldn't it?
Well, again,
you don't play the video game just to get to the end. You play the video game because it's fun to go through the video game.
All right, you got to tell my 7-year-old that, all right? Please. No, I think you're 100% right. And I think that point is really important, both of them. One, that I never thought about it that way, but I think it's very insightful to think that, yes, you have lived multiple lives because I don't want to be the person I was in high school or junior high or even 21, right? Or maybe even 30. I don't know. I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. And as far as the other point, I think it's incredibly true. I think that is a great analogy and a cool way of looking at life from the standpoint that those little pieces do matter. And I think that we just need to appreciate it more because we do want that instant gratification. We do want and I struggle with this too. I'm not a patient person. I know you all are out there like, come on, you look like a Zen master. I am not.
I'm not either, to be honest.
Of course not. That's part of why I love this podcast, because we can be so honest and just talk about the whole process of it. And it's fun though, because when I look back on the times when I was patient, it paid off. I was less stressful. I was happier, and I did get the result usually most of the time. It's when I'm too focused in it, too on it, that I become almost obsessed about it, and it becomes unfun, and it's horrible. And I'll just leave you with one more story that happened recently. So last night we went to a concert. It was a Elvis impersonator kind of concert, and there was a 2-part. So there was an intermission. So in the beginning and the second part, the Elvis guy came out and he had a bunch of scarves he was wearing. And I was passing them out to women that ran this to the stage. I looked at Kelly and my mom and I was like, you guys got to go do that. Go do it. And they're like, no. You could tell my mom wanted to. Kelly was like, you should go with her. I'm like, well, I don't want to go up there. And I just thought it'd be weird if I went up there. But then I'm like, why is it weird if I go up there? Like, anyways. And so I got caught in my head again, and it was just these weird moments. And I didn't want to be perceived a certain way, but I also wanted my mom and Kel to have fun. And so I got caught in a weird, YouTube, Bono says, I was caught in a moment, but not a good way. There's just be present. Don't get caught in your head. Don't worry about the perception of it. If you want to do it, go do it. And don't miss out on opportunities like this, because being free and being present gets rid of those stresses because you find new ways. And it's just like anything else. When you are not consumed by the process, or you are consumed by the end goal, or you're not consumed with the stress of the goal or whatever it is of the moment, everything opens up. And you can see things much more clearly, and you're much more resolute, and you're just able to be there. And one of the things my dad used to say, and I don't give my dad a lot of credit most of the time, he did say the enemy of good is great. I didn't understand it for years. It's a very important distinction though, that what is your goal in life? Is it to be good and live an amazing life? Or is it great and be stressed and always looking over your shoulder? And where do you fall in these things? Is it a balance? I don't know what the right answer is for everyone, but I just think that it's an important distinction and a very less stressful one.
I agree with that. And I think part of it is when you get into that hyperfixation and you start recognizing that you're doing that, if you can catch it before it spirals, you'll often be in a much better place, because then you can be like, okay, hold on a minute, and have that awareness and stop it. And you can actually argue with yourself of like, okay, is it really this, or is it that I'm worried about that? Is it fear that's actually driving the decision making here? And usually if fear is driving your decision, you're not making the right decision. I would say 9 times out of 10, it's really rare when I would say, unless your life is like in danger.
We're going to leave
that fear is not, shouldn't be driving your decisions. It shouldn't be in the driver's seat. Also, when we get so attached to certain outcomes, we get so attached to the way we think something's supposed to be. That's part of where the perfectionism comes from. But when you are working in that state of attachment, your energy is constantly in the state of lack. You're constantly chasing things. You're forcing things to happen. You're pushing things in directions to try to get the outcome that you want. But when you detach from that and you allow things to happen a little bit more organically, it allows the right people and the right circumstances to come in with way less energy that you have to put into it. Because instead of you trying to force a situation to happen, it just ends up working and ebbing and flowing on its own, because everything has cycles. There's going to be times when things are great. There's going to be times when things aren't great. There's going to be times when things come really easy. There's going to be times when you have obstacle after obstacle and you're like wanting to pull your hair out. But all of that is part of the natural ebb and flow in general. And if you can work with that energy instead of against it, I think that helps a lot, not only for your own well-being and your success part, but like your mindset and your mental well-being as well. It kind of takes the pressure off of a lot of these situations, so you don't feel all this anxiety all the time. Like, as we wrap up, as Justin likes to say, it's the first time I've ever said that. As we wrap up today, it feels good. I'm Justin Prust. As we wrap up today. Yeah.
We got to do your hair. Come on. We got it next.
Wait, hold on. As we wrap up today.
High five you, Blake.
I still went the wrong way.
All right. Number 11.
Right.
Number 11. Number 11 is it. So I'm going to leave you with a funny story that, and by the way, you delivered that perfectly. So I'm proud of you. So there's a comedian that I love called Nate Bargatze, and he does a riff or a bit that I think is just hilarious, where he comes across this homeless guy in some city and he looks at him, and the homeless guy goes, just out of the blue, he goes, "You could be me someday." And he takes a pause, and the way he delivers it so funny, he's like, "You know, a lot of things would have to go wrong in my life if I ended up like you." You have to lose, like, I'd have to have no one that I could turn to, all these steps of things. He starts laying them out, and like, that is a great way of thinking about it, because we're always so afraid of the high and the low. To get to the low, there's a lot of steps that have to happen in most people's lives. In order to be destitute, your world has to just crumble. But again, it's not necessarily the end either. And it just made me laugh, because he's just like, wait a second, I'm never going to be like you, and he's like, everything in my life would have to fall apart. I'd have to have no family, whatever. And I think that having those little points in life to reference when you're going through something hard or you are trying to perfect yourself is reflect on that and say, what is the worst that can go on here? But what's the best as well? And then balance those things out so that you get your fears out, but you also get your optimism and the insight as well, and get that whole yin and yang going together, which is so important, because like you said before, you can't have success without failure. It doesn't make any sense, because there would be no success. It would just be average. It would just be the expectation. You have to have these highs and lows to understand and appreciate things. And so don't stress, don't worry, be in the moment. Of course, there's things to stress about. And as Blake said earlier, if you're being chased by a hyena in the plains of Africa, yeah, you should make a decision right then and there what to do. But considering most of us, we treat things like they're life and death. And I always use the analogy of, look, I am not a brain surgeon in the ER. Nothing I do, no one's going to die today. Hopefully, slow down, take your time, be methodical, focus, enjoy the process, and don't overthink it.
I agree with you. And I'll add one thing to what you said, just a final thing, because it helps me a lot. And it's something that it took me a long time to realize. If you are worried and you are having anxieties and fears and stress, writing it down actually has been proven to relieve that. Scientifically, your brain processes things differently when you write them out and you acknowledge them. If you're actually afraid of things happening, write them all on a list, and you will feel better afterwards by doing that. And it'll actually help your mental health and your anxieties and your fears, and you will easier be able to tell the difference between the things that are realistic fears and the things that are not. And oftentimes you'll come to find that the unrealistic fears are the ones that usually are holding us back the most because they're coming from a place that we don't even know exactly where it's coming from. And it's usually some insecurity or something like that. You have the gong.
What? We can't have the gong. You know what we didn't do today? I just realized.
What didn't we do?
We did have some, but we never called it out. The knowledge bomb.
Oh, we did it. Wow.
Oh, Blake. I know we had them. And more importantly, I know you guys all had a great time. So thank you, Blake.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, audience. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We drop every Thursday. Well, Justin, as they say, all good things must come to an end.
Alas, they must. However, this isn't the end because next week, same time, same channel, we drop another episode.
So get excited because we're going to be diving deeper into all the topics of the not so subtle truth about success and
the art of sucking less in the pursuit of it. So join the conversation below and don't forget to subscribe.